from the box house. I'll let him describe his connections to Sitka and his journey with his art. Preston's work is unlike any other Northwest Coast native artist that we have had speak here. His creative process combines Tlingit culture with the material of glass. He uses a broad range of inspiration by fusing mythologies, genetic memory, spiritual connection, modern art, glass, and music with Tlingit culture. His work is in museums and galleries from Anchorage, London, Seattle, Kansas, Sweden, Washington, D.C., France, Scotland, too many places to name. There's the whole list of them on his website. Currently, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American Indian is exhibiting his solo exhibit, Raven and the Box of Daylight, which opened just last month, the 28th, and will close next January on the 29th, 2023. So if you're on the East Coast, be sure to stop in there. Join me now in welcoming Preston Singletary.
Thank you. Preston Aksayi, Tlingit ke nach Kochen duasaf, Kagwantana, Chutzati, Seattle Kwana Yachat. And that's the extent of the Tlingit language that I know. can't do any more than that unless anyway, back to school for me. But yes, I honored to be here. This is my ancestral home from my great grandmother who moved from Sitka in 1923. And let's see, get going here. What do we do? We've been having a devil of a time with these things. Now my presentation is not advancing. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Maybe I got to do this. Okay, so yeah, I grew up in Seattle, and I, and I still continue to live and work there. This is a picture of my great grandmother in the center at the Sitka sewing class here, and she was. Her name is Susie Johnson. She married George Bartlett, who was died in 1919 in a sawmill accident, and then they had 3 or 4 kids together at that time, one including my grandmother, and then she married a Filipino man named Dionisio Gubatayo. This man here, who I knew as my great grandfather, my step great grandfather. Anyway, they lived in Seattle till her her final days, and she died in 1980 at the age of 100. And so I did get to know her. I was born in 1963, so I was teenager when she passed away, and we spent time with her. My great uncle recorded a lot of stories from her and shared them with us, all of my cousins and my aunties, my whole family. Anyway, this is my son this is several years ago now. He's 22 almost. But I love that photo because it's when we were up in Celebration when he was about 4 or 5 years old there. So yes, I'm from the Kagwantan. I'm killer whale, the eagle moiety. I understand that we have the wolf and the brown bear in our clan symbolism, and so here I like to show this to people who are not from Sitka because this is kind of cool. We must have owned that street, I guess. Probably more than just the street at one time. So this is my wife. She comes from Sweden, and we met in 1993, and then we had these 2 kids. And so growing up in Seattle, I was a musician primarily. That was my first love, was music. And so I tried to make it as a musician, but it wasn't in the stars for me, so I didn't manage to become a rock star like I hoped to. But I anyway, so I have a lot of imagery. I'll probably be accused of oversharing. I have, after 40 years of making art and working with glass, I it's hard to, I have to edit what I share with people, but I'm going to share a lot of information with you. This is kind of the origins of how I got started with glass. This is May 18th, 1980, the eruption of Mount St. Helens. An auspicious moment in the Northwest when some of the artists took the ash from the volcano and they would melt it, and the basis of glass is silica, so they would melt the ash and it would melt into glass, and then they would make Christmas balls, paperweights, and things like that. So I worked in a factory for about 3 years before I shifted over to work with Benjamin Moore, who is the fellow on the right here, who was Dale Chihuli's right-hand man. It was a student of his, and then helped him continue to make his work. And here we're working with this Italian master glassblower here, the fellow with the glasses that I'm standing right next to. And Lino Talia Pietro is an amazing teacher, and he shared with us a lot of this, the European glass techniques. Here we're working for Dale Chihuly, making a very, very complex form with these sort of curlicue glass things that are stuck onto this vessel. But anyway, I learned so much from these people through working, first in the factory, then working with artists and learning about glass on a very practical level, helping them make their work. So this is a team I worked with for about over 20 years with Benjamin, working with different artists who would come to the studio, and we would help them execute their work. So if I were to go all the way back to, I didn't, technically I didn't, okay, not technically, I didn't finish high school. I dropped out of high school, fell straight into glass blowing. And so since I didn't go to school, there's this sort of what I call this confluence of inspirations that really kind of led me to what I do today. In high school, Carlos Castaneda was a very, intriguing figure that wrote an author who wrote these books that we were all infatuated with. And this kind of awakened kind of a spirituality in me, because I wasn't raised with any religious instruction. So this was something that was kind of, very fantastic, in this idea that he was hanging around with a Mexican shaman and having all these adventures, and that he could navigate in his dream time, he could go to other places. And that led me a little to kind of think about dream analysis, and Jung came to the fore because he was one of the bigger, the one that studied, one of the guys that studied dream analysis, and he liked to equate it to Native American vision quests and all these things. So slowly I'm starting to think about these things, and all the while, developing my work through going to the Pilchuck Glass School, for one, is an international glass school. Are to me these kind of spiritual, this is a soul catcher. It becomes a very sculptural form. This is exaggerated in its scale, but it is, I call it a sculpture, and it points to the spirituality of the Tlingit tribe, Tlingit people. So I spent a lot of time thinking about this and learning about the form line, learning about the stories and the protocols through talking with people and understanding that there's clan crests, there's this symbolism of anything can refer back to a family. So I spent a lot of time working on these amulet forms because I was hoping that they would be more neutral and not representing a crest symbol. So to me, this was if these pieces come from a pretty broad range of throughout my career as working on these things. You know, there's a 20-year span, in some of these pieces. Um, so another thing that really added to my thought process was studying Aikido. And it was really interesting because Aikido is a martial art, but and it's my teacher or sensei would say he would call it a moving meditation. But what it meant to me was actually when you're blowing glass, you're working with an opposing force. So it's like with martial arts, you're working with an opponent that's coming to you, and you blend with the energy and you try to redirect it. With the glass blowing, it was a physical manipulation of this material, and when it gets really physically challenging when you're making larger pieces. So I've always, enjoyed the process and working around the fire and working with this molten medium. And so it becomes, a bit of a a process of, physics versus, your physical strength and all of the above. So, as a glass worker, we work in teams, and the depending on what kind of, we need people to help us with this process, depending on what we're making. And obviously with larger pieces, you need people that can help you lift the piece back and forth and reheat it and shape it. And it's about teamwork. And so I feel like this collective, this art form is really dynamic because it is about working as a team, and everybody's collective energy kind of goes into the piece, in my opinion. So this, some process shots, examples of how I'm making a mask form here. It's a killer whale mask, and you can see with the fin and then the human figure that's clutching onto that form. But so anyway, that's my life for nearly 40 years. I've been working with glass. In the fall of 1982 is when I started, so it's coming up on 40 years, which is really kind of hard to imagine for me. But so I like to use this term genetic memory because this for me is kind of an awakening of this learning about the the Tlingit culture, learning about the stories, learning about the art, and the rules and regulations behind all of the design work, and finding people to help me learn that process. And this is one of the first pieces that I developed, which became like a canvas for me to draw on and carve these designs into the glass. So this upside down crest hat becomes a glass bowl. And I'll tell you a quick story, which is a funny one, because my aunt, she was really excited that I was endeavoring to put Tlingit designs on glass. And so one of the first times I had one of these examples was at holiday open house at the studio that I worked at. And so my aunt came over to see what we'd been working on. And usually, the studio I worked in, Benjamin Moore, he had these beautiful pedestals and lights, and we, the assistants, would have like a little card table over in the corner. But my aunt said, well, can we take the hat form and put it on the pedestal with a nice light? And I said, sure. So we took Benjamin's piece down, and I put my piece up, and about 10 people had gathered around to see what was going to happen. And the shadows came through the hat, and everybody's like, oh my, look at that. And I was like, well, that's what I intended all along. That was like the eureka moment, where I realized that working with, this kind of idea of carving, and then you've got the matte and the shiny, it allows the light to come through, was kind of a spirit behind the piece, is what I've come to think of it as. But of course, I spent many years trying to make it look like a piece of wood, a carved object that was very traditional. And so I worked on all these different shapes and tried to determine, what I could do to, and and how far I could take it. So a lot of these forms, again, just a random selection of a broad period of time, and exploring different kinds of shapes that are traditional objects from our culture. And this one's actually quite large. This is more of like a full-size chest, but this is fabricated glass. It's kiln-formed glass, and then the the design work is then carved into the thickness. Um, this is another kiln-formed piece. This is full-size canoe paddle, and so this is another way I was trying to um, change, make larger pieces than I could in the blowing studio. Um, Kind of something that I've done for many years is making baskets, and so this is an homage to basketry, and oftentimes I'll put them on a shelf, and so they kind of have a little bit of a dialogue, between all these pieces, and sell it as one piece with the shelf included. Um, and then playing with the idea, to get the mask shape. In this case, I had to create a mold that I could blow the glass into before. And so I started with making masks in this way, and then I can change the design and change the color, and thereby making a different kind of a look for each piece. That is another similar piece to the one you saw in the blowing process there. Um, killer whale mask. And this is kind of a rendering of a, kind of a sheep horn spoon form. And so have a lot of time, a lot of fun trying to make it, make these look like the traditional objects. Moving along here, this was the whole idea of the hero's journey and the Joseph Campbell kind of perspective. And this was something that I got really into in a couple of images forward here. But this was another thing that really informed my interests or my approach to the work. This is Joe David, who's the New Canoe tribe. He's from the west coast of Vancouver Island, but he's a very, very well accomplished carver, very amazing guy. He can carve in many different cultural styles. He's really, really super. He's helped me helped open my eyes to a lot of details about the work that I needed to address and make it look more authentic. He also introduced me to the sweat lodge ceremonies while we were up on the campus at Pilchuck. And why I'm sharing with you all of these things is there's a man, Walter Porter, who I worked with from Yakutat. Some of you may know him, but he was, or may have known him since he passed away. But he encouraged me to share with people this kind of journey that I've gone through, because he felt like it would be something that people might be able to, I don't know, become inspired by this whole journey that I've placed myself on. But anyway, that sweat lodge ceremony was pretty, it resulted in the Joe adopted me, and he shared a New Canoe name with me, and he was really close with Robert Davidson. Robert Davidson adopted him. So I felt like in a lot of ways it kind of validated me in many ways, because he is a respected artist, and that was something that was really meaningful to me, especially at that time when I was just getting established and around, we started hanging out around 2000. So here you can see now I'm kind of pushing the envelope, trying to make more different kinds of forms, and kind of flirting a little bit with modernism. Some of these are, oh, actually, this is the stage where I'm kind of showing a broad variety of different forms and how I interpret these, like a swan, for instance. This is how I represented that. This is a cormorant. So this was, again, adding these wings onto the form, and the feet was kind of a thing that I started playing with a couple years ago. And Jackie asked me, what's the most difficult thing that you do that you have to make or that you want to make? And this has to be it, the raven rattle. Because all of these elements are made in separate sessions, and then they're all brought together in one blowing session, and then picked up and stuck together and melted. The hot glass is melted all together, and then after, if that wasn't enough, then after it's done, I have to then cover it all with this rubber tape and sandblast all of the black away to expose the red that you're seeing. So that's really the kind of like the showstopper of what, at least in my opinion, what I do with this material. Obviously, here's a oyster catcher rattle here. This was another format that I really have a lot of fun working with. This might have been my favorite oyster catcher rattle, with little land otters kind of on the side there, chasing this shaman. Of course, the raven, this became the darling of what I do for many years. People still ask me to make these things, and I've agreed to make a few a year, but I want to keep my my brain working on other new things. So I could get stuck in a pattern of making these, hundreds of them probably, but I won't do it. Kind of playing with that idea of that spirit vapor coming out of the killer whales, that they're blowing off this vapor when they breach the surface. And then, getting into elements of storytelling is where I'm headed with some of this stuff. And this was a piece that I did about petrel. So I tried to make this look like a petrel bird, and then here's Raven. It's the story of Raven stealing all the water, and so now he's dribbling the water out of his mouth and creating the rivers and the streams. And this is kind of something that, trying to mix it up too. It's a bit of, is it lights on? Am I supposed to quit? No. Okay. Lights on, lights off, whatever you want. So anyway, this was a killer whale, and I remember reading about killer whales. This was that the killer whales would chase the seals towards the hunters, and so this was kind of a little pictorial thing that I made. And then this was the Raven in the Box of Daylight. So I played with aspects of that story, and this was the White Raven talking to the fishermen of the night, and asking, "Where's the daylight?" This was, my iteration of Hawk, flying out to catch the fire out in the ocean and bring it back for mankind. This is kind of like the black skin, this cultural hero that would put on a killer whale robe and go and catch, the fish for the village. So you can see the little figure inside the killer whale form there. And this is a new direction of lost wax casting. So this is generally I work with a carver and collaborate with a carver to make these forms. And this becomes a wax, and then the plaster is cast around the wax, and you melt the wax away. Then you load it up with glass, and then you melt it into the form. Just very akin to bronze casting. And so this way I can kind of render a very traditional looking piece, in this crystal. This piece weighs about 250 pounds of glass. And just a little bit about surrealism, modernism, primitivism. This was something, as I started to, study, look at art that I found interesting. When I was younger, and I discovered surrealism, and that really intrigued me because of the psychoanalysis around the art, work, and then it led to modernism and primitivism, which was the modernists that were reflecting on older cultures, or they called them primitive cultures, Native American, African, oceanic cultures. And there's examples throughout that are presented in this exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. And so here you can say, it was Picasso, but was it inspired by this Haida, carving, this mask? So the idea of Brancusi, I started to look at that and try to create, things that were inspired by modernism. So Noguchi, Henry Moore, and it was because this, at one point I read a book by a native scholar named Renard Strickland, who, and the book was called Tonto's Revenge, and he said, it's ironic that the modernists forced us to look at the primitive and appreciate differing levels of reality. And what I learned from studying primitivism is that the modernists, these artists that were educated in the European modes of art making, were really trying to unlearn the things that they had in art school or whatever, and looking to African art and Native American art for inspiration, because the things that we made as, in our significance, and they represented man's connections to the cosmos and everything, and the origins of the people, and it told stories. And so I think that that's really, really fascinating when you're starting to look at modern art. And whereas Native American art has largely been excluded from the modern art world, it hasn't been given its place, not yet, on a large scale, its place in history. But things, since I've been doing this since like the late 90s, I've seen a lot of change, and I see a lot of opportunity, which is exciting to see more Native artists getting recognition in the bigger art world. Another sort of nod to modernism with these mobiles, which are inspired by Calder, and this was a piece. Let's see if this is going to work. This is supposed to have sound, but I don't know if you're going to hear anything. Some of the music that I actually created was with my friends. And this is some new work that was just finished in the past few months here. Well, not this one. Again, playing with the glass techniques and trying to make this old woman here. This was another little video vignette. So I'm trying to get a consensus. Is this something that's a cool way to experience the pieces, or this context where What is it? Is it effective? Thank you. Except the music is good. So anyways, here, moving on and oversharing, like I said, like I promised. um, just a lot of different varieties of these forms that I'm working on, and playing with the different design work. This one was kind of inspired by a frontlet, like a shakiet. This one, you can see it's kind of like a wing. It was supposed to be a goose wing. And there's Walter. And Walter and I spent a lot of time together. I met him in the summer of 2004 at the National Museum of the American Indian at the inaugural opening. And at that time, he was really excited. We were excited to meet each other, but he was talking about the Raven story. He goes, you know, I based my whole life's work around mythology, and the Raven story in particular. And so we were going to work on this exhibition that we talked about, that's currently at the National Museum of the American Indian. And, you know, just before we were to get started on that, Walter passed away. And so, but we had worked together for about 3 years. I'd been up to Yakutat a couple times, and he had traveled with me to different museums, doing presentations on my work, and I would try to match his dialogue with you know, pieces that I had made, kind of illustrating the stories that he was talking about, his insights to the stories. So here, you know, this is the exhibition as it's set up at the National Museum of the American Indian, and this is how you experience it. So you're walking into the, you know, the world in darkness, and you've got the raven here, the white. He's white at this stage. This is the these are the fishermen of the night at the head of the Nass River. So I made this glass river and created video backdrop, and also there's a sound component to this as well. So I worked on some music, and we have the Tlingit language, some storytellers telling the Raven story over this music that changes as you move from room to room. And this is the daughter and the old man who has these treasures. This is the ladle that in my version of the story, it was what she scoops the water up to drink the water. And the transformation scene where Raven has to transform himself into this hemlock needle. So this mobile is the idea of Raven deconstructing himself to and changing himself into this hemlock needle. This is the scene where the daughter is pregnant with Raven, who's changing form into a human child inside of her stomach, and the birthing pit that was, you know, replaced by goat's beard moss rather than the furs that I'm skimming over this, assuming that a lot of you know this aspect, the different aspects of this story. This is the transformation that I tried to animate with Raven transforming into a human child. And so this has got video projected onto it. And he's rising up out of this hat to change into human form. This is the clan house. Entering the clan house, you can see all the different treasures that are owned by the old man. And here are the boxes that contain the stars and the moon and the sun. So there's the stars and the moon and the sun. And so, okay, so we all know that Raven steals the sun, and then he goes and breaks daylight on the world. And then this video animates, you know, it goes from dark to light. So then you have all these busts with the crest, the crest hats that represent different realms from the land, from the air, from the water, and then the human realm. And so they're all given different kinds of design hats. Little shout out to my team that has been helping me for nearly 20 years make my work. And this Maori proverb, my accomplishments are not my own, but those of many. When I learned that one, it was really interesting because that can also mean I've got my team that's helping me, but then also the ancestral lineage that is from my ancestors and passing it on to others. Hopefully, inspiration of what can be done with new materials. This is my friend David Svensson, who helps me carve. I was talking about my great-grandmother. Here she is on her 100th birthday. And she had a pet grizzly bear for a pet. So this was on the front page of the newspaper, and I'm a Seattle Times delivery boy on that day, and I'm throwing the paper up on the porches, and like I get home, like I'm all tired. My mom's like, "Did you see your great grandmother on the front page of the Times?" Like, no, I didn't even look at it. There she is in full, on the front page. So this is the totem that I worked on with David Svensson, who spent many years up in Haines, Alaska, working at Alaska Indian Arts. So we worked on this piece together, and this is represents my great grandmother with the grizzly bear cub. And so this is one thing. My original goal was to make this in glass, but then I ended up doing one in bronze because it was easier than glass until I could identify a studio that could help me with the glass. And I've actually agreed to donate this to the city of Sitka. So we found a space here outside of right outside by the canoe that we're going to install this piece here. It's about 7.5 feet, 8 feet tall. So kind of return the spirit of my great grandmother to Sitka. So that is going to happen this spring. This is the second large totem that we did, me and David, and this one represents my main crest symbols. So we've got the wolf, we've got the eagle, the killer whale, and the thunderbird is emerging out of the killer whale's mouth, and that's actually the David Svensson was adopted by Tommy Jimmy Jr. From Haines. Yeah, and he anyway, so takes it very seriously. He doesn't make any native art except for when he does it for me because he doesn't feel comfortable doing it. But you can see that he has a lot of ability, so we work on these pieces together. There's a glass version of that one. This one I worked on with David as well, but this one represents kind of like the Swedish heritage of my wife. So you can see she's on the top figure, and then you have Odin, who has 2 ravens. He's always sort of flanked by 2 ravens. I thought that was interesting, correlation between the Nordic mythology. And then we've got the rest of my family and our dog there, represented as a wolf. And although our dog's just a little cockapoo, but she gets to be a wolf. She's a wolf in her own mind. So a little bit about public art. I'm going to wrap it up here pretty quick. I can go on and on and on. Before we run out of time. What time do we have to be? What time do we have to be? I don't know what that was. Can you hear me? All right, this is a piece we made for the Boney Courthouse. So I've been trying to navigate into public art. Here's a few examples of what I've been able to accomplish in the past few years. This was I call it a dance staff. It's down in Portland. and it is illuminated. The glass lights up at night, so that's kind of a special piece there. This was made for the Burke Museum. It's a commission I did with um, some slalom carvers. So kind of working with other local natives from the Puget Sound region and helping them understand the process of glass making. And this is one that was recently done for the Climate Pledge Arena, and it just so happened that uh, the Seattle hockey team is called the Kraken. So that was kind of fun. So I spent some time traveling and working with other indigenous artists from Hawaii, New Zealand, and even Australia. So we would get together as artists and we would share our culture, respective cultures. Um, and here we are in New Zealand. Amazing people, really, really just inspirational in their um, their culture and their unity as a people, and how they just support each other and have all this unification behind their and now they have like two Maori language TV stations, and they have they embed the language in the schools, and they're navigating into politics, and they're sharing with me how to be um, how to do their haka. You can't see it. There it is. Anyway, looking pretty fierce. So yeah, so sometimes we get to set up a little glass studio here in Hawaii, and that was fun to be able to work with share my material with at these gatherings, which I'm not always able to do. Just okay, I'm gonna go really fast now. Collaborations. So this is Jody Naranjo, Santa Clara Pueblo Potter. Some of her works that we've done with. So they become like the design artist, and I make the glass for them. And then we figure out how to transfer the designs onto the glass. Tammy Garcia is probably one of the most famous potters from the Pueblos. Her work is really incredible. We had a lot of fun working on all these things. Harlan Rayano is Santo Domingo Pueblo. So I spend a lot of time in Santa Fe. I go down there, so I interact with a lot of the artists from that region and from around the country. These are some of the pot forms and the clown figures that he works on as well. This is Jambawa Marwili, who's from the Northern Territory in Australia. And they came to work with me, this other fellow, Goinby and Jambawa came to Seattle in December. And I want to say it was the first time they'd ever seen snow. I don't think they had ever been. I mean, it was like, it's like everybody was afraid that they just weren't going to, they weren't going to do so well in the cold, because they don't go anywhere unless it's 75 degrees or plus. Like, in the southern part of Australia, it's like, well, we're going to wait till it warms up a little bit. It's too cold if it's 60 degrees. Anyway, so this is some of their work, and that this is going to be here. Joe David, of course, some of the things that we work on together, where he's kind of directing, the imagery and the design work. Objects from the whale house that are inspired by the whale house. Lewis Gardner, these are some of my favorite ones. So we're looking at, in Tlingit culture, we have Natslane. Well, they have their whale rider in their culture. So this was a jade. The green piece is jade there, and same case here. So we were bringing our design work and to the glass, and he would do the jade part too. And this guy, I get to work with this guy sometimes. and he's Choctaw from southeast or the southern part of America. And this is Raven Sky River, who also has Tlingit ancestry, and he's also a glass worker, and he makes amazing sort of realistic looking sea life. There's some humpback whales that I put some design work on there, and a couple of killer whales, mother and calf. It's a collaboration I did. I like the idea of the beaded or the woven bottles. So I thought, well, I'd make a more of an organic form, and Lisa Telford did the weaving on this one. This is the one where you're supposed to be able to hear incredible music, but this is my group. Let's see if it's gonna work. The radio's not tuning in very well. Anyway, this is a group that includes Tlingit, Haida, and I was working with Steve Blanchette, their Kachung, who was from Panmua. And these are albums that we make. Okay. Skip the audio part. And then I got to work with this fellow, Bernie Worrell, who was co-founder of Parliament Funkadelic, who was a big group from the 70s, 80s. And I met him when I turned 50, and I paid into a Kickstarter, and he played my 50th birthday, and I told his wife, so I paid into this level that they would drive out to, they're going to pay for a tour bus, and if I paid in at this level, they would drive the tour bus out to my city, and they would play a party. And so they said, yeah, so what do you do? You're a lawyer or something? And I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a Alaska Native, glass artist. And she said, oh, well, we're, Bernie and I are both Cherokee. And I said, well, yeah, but I also play in a band. And at that time, the band was called Little Big Band, and it was a Native focus band as well. And so she said, well, you should open up for Bernie's band. That would look really good on your resume. And I said, well, yeah, I'll see if we have. Oh, yeah, it looks like we're available. Yeah, I think we can work that out. And so we did. We opened up for his band, the Bernie Worrell Orchestra. And then at the end of the day, after we did the show together, then he said, I've been thinking about your music, and we got to work together. We should collaborate. And I was like, what? You're talking to me, right? Okay. So I said, sure, why not? So we spent about 3 years working on music together, and today we have 4 triple vinyl LPs. And anyway, just have an amazing group of people collaborating on this musical project, and we call ourselves Kuik. And we so anyway, we spent the 3 years working on all this music, and we're continuing to make, push in new directions. Unfortunately, we lost Bernie in 2016 to lung cancer, but he some of the people that we play with, you might even recognize. Gene Tagaban brings his sort of storytelling and Tlingit language to the group. This is our new keyboard player out of Seattle. Sandra Segundo is a Haida singer, and she's really amazing, kind of gospel soul singer. Stephen came down and performed with us. He sings on our 4th album. And then we're also working with Arias Spoil from originally from Juneau. So he's down in the Seattle area. So we're going to work with him coming up here real soon. So anyways, it's really, if you could hear it, you might like it. It's very jazz rock and sort of funk oriented. We have a lot of fun. 10-piece band, 2, 3-piece horn sections, so Clarissa, she was involved with us with our group. She was one of the co-founders. Fortunately, we lost her in 2016 as well. So we lost both our 2 members of the group in 2016. So her voice and some of her spoken word pieces are featured on our recordings. And that's it.
Bravo.
Yeah. So I know I kind of was prattling there, but if you want to hang out and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay.
Can I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Oh, hold on one second. We got one person speaking here, but I'll take your question in a second. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, good one. Thank you. Thank you. No, it's it's part of what I was hoping too, that with this exhibition to share the culture on a broader level and and transport somebody into another place. And I think that sounds like that's what it felt like to you. So I'm honored that it affects people that way. I've been told, more than once that people are coming out of the exhibition in tears. So I can safely say that my work drives people to tears. And hopefully it's all in a good way. So no, but it's an honor, and thank you for honoring me with that statement and the gifts too. So I know I had somebody in the back. There's somebody online that also wanted to ask a question, and I'll let them go and then take another question. Was that person still there?
This is Jan Steinbright. I'd like to say something.
Yes,
Preston, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi. Hey, your installation of the box of daylight just knocked my socks off. Many, many, many years ago, we gave you a scholarship from the Institute of Alaska Native Arts to study at Pilchuck in Seattle. You were just getting started. I think that was the early 80s.
That's right.
And then I saw you again in Juneau with Clarissa and her group forming that committee for cultural arts. I've watched your career progress, and I have to say, all I can say after this presentation is bravo. You're doing a beautiful job of taking us into the next century. I just wish Jim Chopert were still alive to see what you're doing with glass. Can you imagine? Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to Sitka. I've really enjoyed this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you make just one of everything, or do you make the same thing several times? I didn't see anything repeated up there, so I was wondering.
My process is because there's always a lot of forethought and trial and error, so depending on the form that I'm working on, um, like the hat form becomes like a canvas. I have 50 different designs that I've put on different hat forms. Or if I'm working like with a dish or a rattle or whatever, they're all slight variations. The proportions are always a little different, and the design work is always intentionally different. So, I'll and when you're making glass, there's always something that it might crack or it might cool poorly, and it might come out of the kiln broken. So, yeah, so I generally work in uh, kind of in different kinds of series. And in some cases I'll just kind of explore and play with the form when I'm making something that's more abstract or more modern, I would say, that is, like a non-traditional form, then I can be really free with it. So I create in both ways. Some pieces are complete one-off pieces, and some of them are inspired by the same form, but they come in different colors or in different proportions. You know, and as my skills evolve, then they become better, you know, over time as well. Yes. Yeah, the question was is the exhibition, well, the exhibition at the NMAI is open through January 29th of 2023. And then I put all this information up if you are all on social media, because I'm posting all the time through the studio and updating those sites about upcoming exhibitions, if they're in Santa Fe or Seattle or East Coast somewhere. Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to keep in touch if you're interested. You can find out more by and then my website in general. We have a blog on the website which we try to add to every once in a while, and a lot of information and images there too.
We did get a question in the chat box on Zoom, and someone asked if you could talk a little bit about your glass equipment.
My what glass?
You said glass equipment.
Oh, the glass equipment that I work with. So I have a small studio in Seattle, and it's like a 200-pound furnace that is where I melt the glass. And then I have another bigger working station. So it's just a reheating chamber and a couple of benches. So it's a very small studio, but most of the work that I make is produced in the studio, most of the blown and sculpted work. If I need to make larger pieces, then I'll go to other studios. Then I work a little bit with other fabrication studios, one in Portland where they work primarily in a kiln formed process where they're making the slabs. Like, for instance, you know, the big wall screens, they're made up of multiple panels. Those are handmade glass, layers of colored glass. And then, so that it's all fired on, and then I'll draw onto it and cut out the areas that are going to be carved, and then carving through the layers of color. So I didn't talk too much about the technique that I used, but it's basically a stencil material that is very common in the use of making design work on tombstones. So it's just a rubber masking that allows for areas to be opened up and exposed, and then I can carve along that line. So everything is hand drawn, you know, onto this rubber tape, then hand cut, and then sandblasted, and then and the sandblasting is where I'm wearing the layers of color away to expose the color underneath. So the high contrast that you see in my work is basically, you know, positive, negative, is the layers of color.
So I was lucky enough to go see your exhibit in DC with Lakota, and I was just wondering, because it really is beautiful how you walk in, you get to experience it. How much does the space that your art is displayed in, how much would you say that has an effect on how people or the audience is able to
I mean, the exhibition takes up around 5,000 to 7,000 square feet. I think the biggest venue was the Museum of Glass, where the show originated in Tacoma, and then I think it's a little over 5,000 feet at the NMAI. Yep. Here.
Oh, my chief, that was powerful. And I have a question and a comment. The question has to do with the use of the circle. It seems that you use the circle more than anyone else I've seen in art. And then the comment, for the extent to which you engage
Well, the circles that, I learned, I mean, the part of the design system that I've learned, the formline design system, the circle can become like a little bit of a relief of a area that is really dense, or a junction, and it can just be more of an element that just is placed there to relieve the tension of the thick black line. And in the case of the larger, more sculptural forms in the circles, that I think of that as kind of a rattle form. I think of it as kind of I mean, I wasn't sure if you were asking about like within the design system specifically the circles, but I've come to learn that those are the used for that reason in the form line design. Well, thank you for the other comments too. That they're I do feel like a collaborator. I work. I think that the best work can come from, it's like music to me. It's like playing music with people. When it's kind of intangible, you're speaking a language, you're playing with the context of the music, and everybody's reacting to each other. And it's very similar in that way with glass making, depending on the kind of team that you're working on and how many people are needed. But generally I work with at least 2 or maybe 3 people, but I have worked with up to, 5 or 6, depending on the complexity of the form that I'm working on. But yeah, I think, like I say, that is very true. Like the idea that, that collective energy is going into the work itself, and that and as a glass artist, you're kind of forced to work collaboratively, and so you have to get along with other people. You have to be able to like agree with them and show up on time and all that stuff. So it's really kind of a special process, because there's a lot of money involved in it, and part of the reason that the work is so expensive is the materials that go into it. So you have to make efficient use of the time that you have when you're working. If we say we're going to start at 7 a.m., everyone's there at 6:30. When we're going to the recording studio, and I'm telling all my native friends, it's like, okay, we're gonna start at noon. We'll be lucky if we get there by 1 or 2. It's just like they, it's Indian time, island time, whatever you want to call it. But it's like the way that, yeah, we are dedicated to that process, and it's fun.
From someone on Zoom, Fred Olson. Go ahead.
How Ganshchish Kisgansi Hinodikyang. In the Haida language, my name is Place of One's Own, and I'm Frederick Olson Jr., and I am one of the board members of the Friends of Sheldon Jackson Museum. And really, thank you, Ganesh Chish, great presentation, and you have so much diverse artwork. And I was glad that you mentioned the band Kuik. And I have a weekly radio show, and I often play some of your songs. And I wondered, some of your pieces, you said, there was some music, and I wondered if there is a relation between the music you do with the band and your art, and how those relate. But again, thanks again, and I really look forward to seeing what you'll be doing in the future. Hawa.
Thank you. No, to me, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that I always self-described I'm musician trapped in the body of a glass blower, Tlingit glass blower. But so music was my first passion, and so when I got the idea to start working with Native musicians, I've been working with sort of funk rock, funk jazz, rock, folk rock, different bands and kind of on a career path for that. But then that's maybe why I got started very late in getting into the native design work, because I really wanted to be a working musician, or that was part of my artistic expression. So it's always played a constant role in my life. And so but working with people like Gene Tagaban is incredible, because he, at first he brought the language, to the music. Second, he brought like traditional storytelling. And because he's a theatrical, he's an actor, he's really into, he's a poet, he's a storyteller, all of the above. He's so talented. When he brings that to the band, it's amazing what it ends up being. And so we do analyze a lot of themes, native themes in the group. The first album. Okay, here's a true story. How much time we got here? Like I say, I can talk and talk and talk. So the first album was called The Wilderness Within, and that was Clarissa Rizal. She came up with a title for that album because, or she just said it, and I said, well, that's a great idea for an album, because the music that we were doing was with this, a group of highly talented improvisational musicians. All the music that we did was all in one take. Everything that you hear was in one take, and then it was added to. But the thing is that, when Clarissa was like doing her chill cat weaving in the sound booth after, when we were listening back to our tracks, and, the music's, cranked up really loud, and you can feel it like in your chest, and the drums and stuff. And she's like, oh my God, this is so powerful. This is like a wilderness within. This is like, if our children could hear this music and learn and hear it in a new way, it could be really incredible. And so the whole first album was kind of loosely based on the idea of this discovery of this way of playing music and utilizing native culture for a stage for storytelling and what have you, was going to be something, well, at least in my mind, is pretty incredible. And so then the next album was also Clarissa's concept. It was called They Forgot They Survived. There's one song that she wrote about that I think she was talking about, gathering up this, the strands of knowledge and weaving them together in, and talking about how, this knowledge is slowly becoming extinct, but she's latching onto it, and we're forgetting who we were, and that we survived this, the whole idea of being a survivor of, of the genocide, of the change of culture that we were forced with, and that we could morph it into something that is, or remind ourselves that that's what we're going through. And then, on and on and on. So, every album has a theme. So yes, there's a way of this artistic expression that runs through the music, which is very different than the artwork, but it's related in many, many ways. Okay, yeah. So if you online didn't hear that, the question was, about the Smithsonian show, and how did that come to be, and where's the work going to be going after that? So the Museum of Glass reached out to the Smithsonian to pitch the idea of, so with their network of museums, they would send little prospectus out to them to see if they'd be interested in taking the show. So after it was at the Tacoma Museum of Glass, it went to the Wichita Art Museum, and then it went to NMAI, and then after it's going to go to the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia. And so that's how the museum shows get networked, and they, you know, certain museums might be open to hosting the show, and then they just basically pay a rental fee for it, and then people come in and, you know, have to work with their exhibit designers and also with you know, the Museum of Glass people. They send their people to handle the material, handle the glass, and help with the installation and all of that. And so beyond that, I don't know. It may or may not keep touring. I don't know after Virginia. So I have one piece that I made in the inaugural opening, or for the inaugural opening in 2004, which is a raven with the sun in its beak. It's, you know, it's kind of a, and the ball is illuminated with fiber optics, and that was their idea to do that. So I kind of worked with them collaboratively, and that is at the head of, or at the entrance of the Our Universes exhibit, which analyzes different creation stories from different indigenous communities. Hmm? Yes.
Hear that? Should I say it again? Oh, okay. I was curious how long from when the idea was pitched and how it was, if it was sketches or a concept, and then how much time you had to create all of the pieces for that exhibit, and then if there was a time crunch at all with Dan, since it was such an impressive amount that went into it.
Yeah. Yeah. The so the Raven show took about 3 years to create, for the most part, which, you know, I like to say, you know, I created in my spare time because I was always, you know, trying to make work for gallery shows, because I have a, you know, I have a team, you know, in my studio, which they're full-time employees, and so I have to generate a certain amount of money while also making this work to put into the exhibition. So I mean, I own all the pieces, so I wasn't able to, you know, be paid for them or put them on the gallery market. And so, yeah, so it took that long. And there was kind of, there was a lot of drama towards the end trying to get everything done, because there was, it was a big push. And like fortunately my whole team, they stuck with me, and they knew that, you know, but there were some long hours towards the end that really trying to get everything done. And, you know, but I have to say that, you know, the whole show started to materialize in my mind, you know, starting around 2004, after talking to Walter Porter. And then, you know, all those discussions we had sort of helped me visualize the show, and, you know, like what kinds of objects would I need to illustrate the show, you know, thinking about the show as, you know, or masks in general, are kind of like stagecraft in a lot of ways, you know, and they're used to tell stories, you know, in a traditional way. And so I was, you know, simply taking it to another level and using a lot of technology to sort of help, you know, transport the viewer. So there was a lot of, you know, a lot of things and a lot of people involved too that helped, you know, a theater, he works in the theater, but he's also a visual artist, and he helped me stage all of the, well, design the show and then do all the video work, you know, so that was something that we developed together. Yeah. Thank you.